This podcast is part of the Spoon Podcast Network, home of smart conversations that feed your mind.
The future of food is being created as we speak, and the science fiction of today might become the science fact of tomorrow. I'm your host, Mike Lee. I'm a food futurist, innovator, and author. Each week, we explore today's signals to reveal tomorrow's possibilities. We'll challenge assumptions, we'll question conventional wisdom, we'll imagine what could be, and talk to the innovators who are shaping what will be. This is the Tomorrow Today Show. Let's get started. Hello, world. Welcome to the Tomorrow Today Show, where we talk about the current state of the future of food. Today's episode is all about the future of hedonism. We're going to talk about what hedonism means in food today, how we create enjoyable moments and experiences, and what things we might do differently in the future to celebrate and party. Mike Lee is my name. I am your host. I'm a food futurist and author of the book Mies on the Future of Food. And I'm not alone, of course. Today I'm joined by two amazing co-hosts. First off, we've got Ben Walmer. He's a longtime friend and collaborator. He is a polymath extraordinaire, architect by training. He founded and runs the Highlands Dinner Club, or HDC, as we will refer to quite a bit, and which is an amazing band of pirates that create unforgettable food events. Ben, how are you?
Excellent. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And let's not forget our second polymath. We have not one, but two polymaths. The other one is Charles Temkey, a.k.a. Clam Charles, a man of many incredible talents, from being a chef, coffee guru, fisherman, expert of all things shellfish, not to mention a former professional opera singer, but you're kind of always an opera singer, I guess. And he was just telling us about how he's performed at the Met and all kinds of other stuff. Charles, how the hell are you?
Pretty good. Excited. It's fun.
Sounds good. Everyone's well hydrated. Bio breaks have been taken. Mics are set. We're ready to go. Okay, guys. All right. So today we're going to talk about the future of hedonism. As is every episode in this podcast series, we're going to talk about the future of blank. One of the things that I think doesn't get talked a lot about enough, especially kind of in the industry of food and the future of food conversation, is how are people going to enjoy themselves in the future? How are they going to party? How are they going to celebrate? How are they going to get together? And we're kind of using the word hedonism, and I think I've discovered that to a lot of different people, it means a little bit of a different thing. Let's start with the first question. What does hedonism mean to you guys?
Isn't even the midwinter celebrations, right? Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever we celebrate those shortest days of the year with to get people through. Those all seem like hedonistic pursuits. You're enjoying the harvest, you're enjoying the company, and that's what it is to me. I think it's the same in my ventures on the beach, doing the clam bakes in the summer and the barbecues and things out in the Hamptons. It's the same type of situation. You're enjoying a bounty with friends, and something that you wouldn't do every day, or you wouldn't do at home. Maybe we would, but it isn't something that's a common. It's not quotidian. That's
just something out of the ordinary. That is a breaking up of the rhythm, the cycles of life, kind of celebration to acknowledge. Okay.
Sure.
Ben, what do you think about that? Does that sync up with yours? How do you differ?
I think Charles touching on the relationship piece is a big piece, and I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you want to go on sort of definitions, the formal definitions, and that sort of thing. My general understanding is that hedonism is a general term for the pursuit of pleasure, right? Mm-hmm. But it often, I think, very often has a negative connotation. People hear hedonism, and I guess what is it called? The hedonic principle, right? That everyone is wired to seek out pleasure, and so hedonism has a negative connotation. But I think that formally, it's just a thing that is, right? It exists and it can be taken to the extreme. And then the most sort of famous um, historic example of the philosophy around that is Epicurus, and who really looked at the, sort of often painted as a figure for hedonism, but really he was a figure for moderation and looking at the hedonism from sort of before there was utilitarianism, from a utilitarian standpoint, right? This is a thing, and ultimately concluded, I think, sort of his most interesting idea, which is very relevant today. We're hearing this more and more, is around friendship and community, and that sort of the collective pursuit of pleasure is what produces the meaningful aspect of pleasure, right? Too much of a good thing ends up in excess for an extended period of time, backfires. And produces very unpleasurable outcomes.
Sure.
But like Charles was saying, when you engage around, any of the extensive rituals that are out there, holidays, or just, just for the sake of getting together to break bread, and you do it together, it has a real lasting and meaningful impact, which I think is the purpose of hedonism, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, and I think I've thought about hedonism, like just the basic question of why does food taste good, right? It doesn't have to, or does it, right? Because I think it's interesting that a lot of the things that seem to be necessary to our species survival, sexual reproduction, eating, finding shelter, finding warmth, I think they feel good purposefully because it kind of tells your brain, if an evolutionary standpoint, to go towards those things, right? Like if food was terrible tasting and it was just painful, um, I think the person that had that sensation with food probably wouldn't have survived because they would have just forgotten to eat. If, sex and things like that wasn't pleasurable, they would die off because they wouldn't procreate, right? So I think you're right about hedonism is just that pursuit of pleasure. And I think part of the human condition feels like we're constantly trying to find the balance of how much hedonism is too much. This kind of inner turmoil of like, should I eat that last slice of pizza? Should not, right? Like, um, I don't know. What say you guys on that? Like, what's the relationship between kind of hedonism and food? Like, why does food have to be so damn tasty? Does
Well,
that serve a
it,
purpose?
it doesn't have to be. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who get by on food that's not really tasty, and they get by. But yeah, there is some. I think a lot about the things that you just talked about. Our chemical push, the reward, really like a guiding light, right? Our genetics and everything that's pointing us this way, and everybody has kind of different levels, and it assures theoretically it assures a good distribution of the species, and we could all survive different types of events or uh, scarcity, by different people among us all have a way of getting through that or not getting through that, and we can always ensure that we'll peter along that way. But yeah, that's a great mystery though. Like it's all theoretical. What truly is the reason for it?
Yeah. Well, at least Mike, maybe both of you have heard me ramble on about this before. Um, as an architect who sort of wandered into or stumbled into culinary world and hospitality and event production and becoming a chef, um, I mean, I'm still always trying to understand how that happened and what it is and what the connections are. And it was along probably 10 years ago, I sort of realized that I think there's something meaningful in food and shelter being sort of these fundamental points of survival for humans, right? And I think actually this conversation just in this short period of time so far, I never thought about the connection of hedonism to shelter exactly, right? Like aesthetic, and then you can get into high-minded ideas about beauty and aesthetics with, modern architecture or contemporary architecture, whatever the style. But just going back to, whoever those humans were that were making something to get comfortable in and be protected in, that's its own kind of pleasurable experience, right? To soothe the anxiety of being exposed and naked in the wilderness. And then, we talk about food and deliciousness and what the purpose is. I don't know if there's a great book I read some years ago by, I think it's Richard Wrangham. It's called How Fire Makes Us, or How, yeah, Fire Makes Us Human, I think, which is about this idea that, food and cooking food was central to our evolution.
Yeah.
And, there's something about, I mean, two things are happening there, right? What he shows very clearly is that cooking things creates more access to nutrients, right? And
Yeah.
and it does all kinds of things to make us be able to eat the bones, more of the animal, etc.
Yeah.
But we also know it makes it delicious. So you have this utility thing happening in parallel with the pleasurable experience of that. And they also show how animals, they studied all kinds of animals who, I think almost universally prefer cooked food to raw food, which is
Yeah.
an interesting thing. So, so by my thinking here, the way the aesthetic experience of shelter is fulfilling sort of a hedonic thing. I think the same. So is hedonism, does that help drive our evolution to some degree?
I think it definitely does, and maybe it's just maybe it was more in balance way back in the day when you literally needed a chemical signal to remind you to seek out food, right? Because if you're a caveman and it's the year one, uh, and you just don't know what to do with yourself, you're hungry, and then you know that eating something tastes good, so you're like, I really should get my shit together and go hunt something or grow something, right? We're so far from that now that I almost feel like maybe we're too good at making hedonistic experiences, you know? Like
I often wonder about that same thing.
and I think it's just it's a progression, right? Because like the first person who invented wine, and we're going to get to wine and substances and stuff like that in a minute, but like, the first person to make wine or beer, I mean, I think monks' beer was sort of a tool to preserve excess wheat, right? To kind of like it was a preservation method, and then somebody realized like, holy cow, like I love you, man. I had six of these right now, and it just kind of keeps going. And then you fast forward now to like we've got, all kinds of high potency marijuana and like extremely refined culinary techniques that make things impossibly delicious, whether it's, something from a fine dining restaurant or literally just like the science that goes into Dorito. Like I would argue the Dorito is a
McDonald's, and
pure
yeah,
example of
Doritos,
hedonism.
McDonald's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's no other
Well,
redeeming quality, I think, for a Dorito except for hedonism.
yeah. Well, I agree with all of that, and I wonder also about the food movement, right? And the things that the way the all three of us have been involved and with that and advocated for it and benefited from it as far as engaging with our local economies and farmers, et cetera. There's I have been saying for years, I think there's sort of we're reinventing a thing that we lost because of industrial systems and seeing, it was novel and new, and we were, you know, we were the industrial food system fed and feeds a lot of people, but after time goes by and everyone moves away from agriculture and that sort of those meaningful engagements with the land and how that is part of, I think, experiencing food. And now we're kind of reinventing. What's old is new again, and we're totally reinventing it. And that's why we see all these new sort of forms of hospitality and alternative dining and podcasts like this emerging, because we need to redress the matter, because we've gone, in some ways, gone too far with things, right? We've benefited from it, but there's opportunity costs in that path of least resistance approach to, you know, into, which is what industrial systems are.
I would think also, I would add to that the spread of suburbanism, because that pushed the places of harvest further and further from the urban centers. It used to be that Brooklyn is a great example. I'm sitting here in Bed-Stuy right now. My dad talks about where there's now a Trader Joe's and a Home Depot. He lived on Polo Way, and it was because there was a huge polo grounds, and there was a farm down the road, and other stables down the road. And this,
What?
yeah, yeah, 100%.
Really?
And this is not even 100 years ago. He was born in 32. And he tells stories. We forget how quickly this has all happened. And Brooklyn isn't even suburban. Brooklyn is a proper urban environment. In most other cities, it would be considered a dense urban environment. But of course, next to London or Manhattan or Tokyo or something like that, was huge vertical density. You can look at Brooklyn kind of suburban now, but then you get a little further east to Nassau County and Suffolk County, and that huge suburban sprawl has pushed these farms all the way. There's this zone in between the end of Suffolk County and the beginning of the Hamptons, which is part of Suffolk County, but you get what I'm saying, where that's where the farms are. And the same thing for upstate or, up into Connecticut. There's so much spread. And I think that really changed the connection of the urban centers, but also everybody in the suburban centers too. They were an island unto themselves. There was a different sense of community. Yeah.
Do you think, do you think you can be a responsible hedonist? Because I kind of get this sense that humanity as a whole just kind of constantly ping pongs between trying to be hedonistic and trying to not be hedonistic, I mean, obviously that gets out of control when people get into things like addiction and overeating, over drinking, getting addicted to drugs. But like, even just on an everyday level, I feel like that whole idea is very familiar where someone's like, oh man, I had a bunch of rich food this weekend. I gotta take it easy and have some salads and go back to the gym. Like, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a timeless thing of us going back and
Yeah,
forth between vice and not vice. What do you guys
yeah.
think?
I think there's definitely a cycles thing here. But I would say first, I think again, the everyone's a hedonist. This goes against the sort of, again, that sort of general negative label or impression when you hear the word hedonism. But we're all hedonists. We're all seeking pleasure in some way or another, or trying to reduce pain by doing that, right? But I mean, I think it is. I think you can identify it throughout history that there are when a group of people, a culture, an empire, right, rises to great heights, and you get widespread, relatively speaking, widespread security and affluence. That's when the philosophers like Epicurus pop up and emerge and say, and the more puritanical religious power centers rise up and say everyone's lost their minds and is are indulgent and overindulging. That's when that happens, and we certainly live in an unprecedented time of abundance, and so it couldn't be easier to overindulge too much right now, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so but things go in cycles, but also things change.
Yeah.
I tend to believe in progress, and we have, and so I think that we have more tools than in previous points in this cycle, and you can point to all kinds of examples, like and for better or worse, things like dietary fads, fitness fads, that sort of thing. These are all ways of sort of us collectively trying to deal with this, right?
I sometimes wonder if they had diet fads like in the 1300s, like I'm on the all mutton diet, and it's done great. It's done great for my jousting. Like
they didn't have to, because I was thinking on the long timeline, overindulgence gets genetically weeded out. If you can't
that's pretty metal. That's pretty metal idea to say.
I
get it,
but it's true, and
yeah.
And also we evolved to meet the place. Could you imagine eating a diet solely of dried seal jerky and whale blubber and things that people way up in the Arctic Circle eat all the time, or just grains, or just anything that is the local thing, that would seem to be bad for any of us. And yet the genetics sort it out. The people who can hack that diet end up doing well, and they get through it. I think the danger is in the easy availability of everything always. But we're also genetically programmed for that, because the easier way to get all the micro, not to get too sciencey, but to get all the antioxidants, all the micronutrients that we need. If you eat a varied diet, you pick these things up from all over the place. You don't have to rely on, livers of a certain animal to, to not get scurvy or something like that.
Right. But then
very fortunate to have that.
Complicating all of that is then our free time, and that it's difficult to overindulge and suffer the outcomes or the results of overindulging when you're spending so much time growing, finding food that could be not there. Like times of scarcity were very real and constant threat. And of course, we're talking across, as you mentioned, Charles, the environments that people would exist in, which is the whole planet. So there's just a huge, but that scarcity and a ton of work to get nourishment was the rule, almost anywhere, right?
Yeah, and I think like I sometimes wonder if somebody who maybe on paper eats and lives in a way that is, you wouldn't consider that hedonistic, like I'm only eating vegetables, I eat just the right amount of food, I get 8 hours of sleep, I exercise regularly. They probably get pleasure out of keeping up a routine like that. So is that person hedonistic? That straight edge, super healthy person?
Yeah, I think so. I think that squares with the sort of the pure meaning and function of hedonism. This part of the conversation made me think of cultures which still exist, and other cultures that exist in the past, like in the Pacific Northwest. Hedonism was because it was a rare treat to like really overindulge, was something that wasn't available. And so the expression of it, right? Like when the chief or whatever would you'd have these ritualistic events that were about overindulgence. And this still exists in Southeast Asia, right? Where so hedonism is a virtue in that case, right? Like this brings community together and so I think to your point, Mike, that you just mentioned, that it kind of flips it on its head. I think that's what we should be looking at as in our time, is how do we, again, it's this reinvention of things, right? Like, hedonism can play itself out in all kinds of healthy ways. And if we're doing that, then we're combating the ways in which it plays itself out in unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
So that's a good jumping off point to sort of the act two about here, talking about kind of substances, right? We recently had the Surgeon General in the United States say that alcohol leads to cancer. Alcohol has been around. It's maybe the oldest made food, right? Maybe, I don't know what the dates are, but I think wine was made in China in something like 500 or something like that. But it's been around for a really long time.
It's Lindy.
Yeah, it's lit. Okay, so you put all right. So I just learned we had a really wild group chat where Charles, I think anyway, it was the whole conversation about this idea called the Lindy Effect or the Lindy theory, and I had to Google this, but I read the whole Wikipedia on it. Lindy Effect is, correct me, keep me honest on this, but Lindy Effect is basically this theory that says that the longer something has been around, the more likely it's going to keep being around. Ironically, humans are not Lindy, but like you think about this conversation that a lot of people are having these days, which I don't think is new, around like, sobriety, NA, alcohol, no alcohol, low alcohol. We're in the middle of dry January for some people that are celebrating that. And I think I get this sentiment from a lot of people that just kind of flat out say like, we're gonna not drink alcohol anymore as a society. And I don't, as much as like societal maybe positive that would give to somebody, I don't know if I really buy that on a practical level because it has been around for so long. We have had things like the temperance movement, the prohibition movement, and so I feel like we're kind of in a new iteration of like a prohibition-y thing, not regulated, but just like culturally. But I don't know. Would you guys bet money on alcohol going away in the next 100 years?
Absolutely not.
No.
Which is somewhat hard to say without
Not if we
coming.
have anything to say about
Yeah,
it.
I know, but like,
Unless it, yeah,
yeah, go ahead. Unless what?
unless it was a totally organic thing. You know, I
I think it's
love,
the only way it would happen.
right,
Yeah,
right.
right.
It's because as soon as you say you can't have it, people are going to go after it.
I don't
But
think we would be humans anymore. Sort of like that would be such an evolutionary jump, which is not impossible, but it just is. Yeah,
well, to connect it to what we were just talking about in the first segment, Mike was saying, isn't the super healthy people working out and depriving themselves, those endorphins, all the serotonin, the dopamine, all the things that they're getting, it's the same chemicals. It's the same chemicals that when people say, "Oh, I can't understand why so and so became addicted to heroin," it's like, imagine the happiest you've ever been, and then times 1,000, and you could just have that happen. And so all of these things, it's all the same chemical. So however someone arrives at it, maybe those,
You can even arrive at it like the
yeah,
people say. I used to be a big runner's high, which is
sure.
real.
yeah, absolutely,
Or
totally,
Flow
even any
states.
form of exercise.
yeah,
Yeah, like that
yeah,
that feeling I get when I'm like in the zone running or working out feels
yeah.
similar to like when you've had like 3 glasses of wine and you're like, yeah, it's
Or in the push in the kitchen,
Yeah,
before
yeah.
service, or in
adrenaline.
pre and post performance at an opera, sex, of course. There's so many ways to get to it, and I think alcohol is one of them. And again, just to get back to genetics, I love that there are people who are straight edge NA, however you want to approach it, because they found something that works for their genetics. If something becomes ubiquitous and it's bad for you, and you do it to become, to be part of it, and you erase yourself from the genetic sequence because of it, that's a bad idea. And it's a bad idea for humanity because it leaves less diversity in the
Yeah.
genome, right?
Yeah.
So I think people finding their own way is great. Where I jump off is when you say, as a society, there are goods and ills that come of it. Yes, people die in drunk driving accidents. They overdose. They have liver failure. But people will find other ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly,
It's almost like there's an ecosystem for mind altering. What would we call that? And it's good that there are all different ways, and I think that's you get the best outcome when that's supported both in terms of positive and negative outcomes, right? Um, yeah, I don't think it's going away. Oh, and I think that I was going to ask. I know there's been studies around coffee consumption and productivity, right? Has there been any study? I mean, around it can of course go sideways as soon as alcohol consumption is as soon as there's overindulgence, but alcohol is extremely productive in terms of lubricating interactions, and it has productivity effects and
There's
opposite.
so I was at dinner with some old friends last night, actually, at a Korean place, sharing a tower of beer. Ever had one of those? Those are fun. Anyway, so he's a good friend of mine. He's a PhD in biochemistry, and we were talking about like drinking versus gambling, and how he was saying that like gambling kind of over time always just leads to zero. Like the house will usually always win if you gamble long enough, right? And you're just gonna kind of lose your shirt and you're just gonna get addicted to it and chase your losses, and there's a freaking disaster there, right? So obviously, and there's not really any upside winning wise that's sustainable, is what he's saying. Drinking also obviously has a lot of downside. You can become an alcoholic, get in a car accident, and like, there's a liver cirrhosis. There's tons of reasons why you shouldn't overdrink. But he was saying that like alcohol kind of is excused a little bit more because there's also a net positive effect of two beers can also bring two friends together, four friends together, a party together, uh, cause you to meet your spouse, in a way that produces so much net positive that might actually cancel out the effect of the two or three beers, assuming you're in moderation. Like, I don't want to say that the social positives of getting wasted outweigh the negatives of the health damage it does for you. But I just thought that was an interesting kind of insight about how you look at all the different sins, and there's an argument to be made that some of the sins have an upside to them if managed properly. And that's just not like a notion that, like, if you read like the food media and stuff like that, like people kind of don't really bring that up, I guess, anymore. But it feels very it feels like, I don't have any data to prove it, but it feels viscerally kind of true. I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
Doesn't that bring us back to community, though? Like
Yeah.
the difference in an individualistic pursuit becoming an addiction, as opposed to, having drinks at a company function, which brings people together. Sure, the productivity is not immediate; it's delayed. But as long as you're willing to wait for that and not use that as a crutch, you then take that into real life and do something.
I think
I
it's
think that's the tie for me, is the community aspect.
sure. And I think that it's anthropologically true. We carry that out again. The meaning and purpose and of feasting and of these interactions around and the way the production of things like alcoholic beverages, going back in time in these different communities and small economies is part of the glue of those, and not the only thing. It's in a constellation. It's an important piece in a constellation of things that make human communities. Um, you can identify them as communities.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was in Vegas recently for the fancy food show, and I was staying in a hotel that had a casino, obviously, because they almost all do. And I actually didn't gamble a single cent at any table or anything like that. But when you walk through the casino, it always seems like the guys and the girls playing craps are having way more fun than everyone else.
Yeah, yeah,
Because, like,
yeah,
unlike the other games where, like, then you see kind of the lonely person just sitting at the slot machine all by themselves, just like, I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of a depressing sight. But then
yeah.
you look at the craps people, and they're like high-fiving each other and cheering. And again, like, not saying that gambling is a good thing per se, but it seems like when you compare all the different forms of gambling at a casino that you can see, it seems like because craps has more of a community aspect to it.
Right.
I don't know. It just
Yeah,
seems more.
I think that that's a gambling parallel to what we all say often about gathering together, and that it's not about the food, although we make amazing, wonderful food, and it plays a part in those moments and those places that we create together. But it's not about that. It's about the togetherness. It's about the relationship that happens, and like, which plays itself out in all kinds of ways. It's different when we're producing an event for a client for 70 people, and we all come together around this commitment to produce something great within a certain time frame and a certain structure. And that's great. And there's all the adrenaline and this sort of this collective flow state that's magical. But so the same thing happens, like, is going to happen tomorrow at Freedom House, right? Our inaugural random chaos, intentional chaos gathering. We're going to be making this food, and it'll flow. You'll get the same, I don't know, fix and relational effect, but it looks very different because it's intentionally not structured.
It's for joy, and it's for
Yeah,
joy, not
yeah,
for
yeah.
profit or
Right.
out of
Yeah,
necessity or
right.
commitment.
Alcohol, obviously, we talked about a little bit. Obviously, there's way more things than alcohol out there these days. And now, I mean, over the past 5, 6 years, marijuana legalization and stuff like that. A lot of talk, especially from the likes of, the Michael Pollins of the world about, psilocybin for both therapeutic and recreational purpose. Um, are all these things just kind of trying to build a better mousetrap on how to like shortcut your way to pleasure? I guess like what do you guys what's your sense of the landscape of all of these different substances out there, and where do you think that's headed?
I don't know. It's a good question of where it's going. Like it's the cannabis legalization. I think is a good thing. Um, I'm not nearly. I don't not a cannabis user like I once was. It's pretty occasional now, but I think we're starting to see, and I think this will continue to be the case. Um, we're starting to see like the negative outcomes because it's so much more widespread, right? And and there's so much we didn't know about it because it was in the dark. That's why I think it should be legal, is because being in the light and transparent is going to help us understand better. But it's going to take time, and hopefully we won't overcorrect, which is what we tend to do, right? Especially from a regulatory standpoint. And that doesn't, that produces its own negative outcomes, in my opinion. I don't know where it's going. Then, in terms of psychedelics, I mean, I think that I tend to be a believer in the notion that we're knocking at the door of a renaissance with that. I don't like to make predictions, but I think that's a big deal as far as its potential to reduce a lot of suffering. And of course, everyone's asking, anyone who pays attention to that is asking questions about regulation and of course, corporate power centers and how they're going to try to exploit and capture this, because it's a big disruptor for pharmaceutical companies, obviously, and healthcare systems, that if something comes along that's vastly more effective
Yeah.
and out all the other things, all the other tools that they've created currently. So I think there's a lot to come in the next couple of decades.
I think we have this habit as like just modern civilization to over innovate and then overcorrect, because
Mm.
like I think now, right, obviously people have been using marijuana for a very, very long time. But I think that, the marijuana that our parents probably maybe smoked in the 60s isn't the same as the stuff you can get down the street at your legal dispensary these days, meaning potency and stuff like that. It's sort of a parallel to how like before unprocessed food you could kind of just eat as much as you wanted to because it was hard to procure, it was hard to get, and you just had to fill up, right? Because you didn't know where your next meal is. Compare that to again, the Dorito and the high processed foods of the world right now, which are just kind of like overblown, right? um so I think that's interesting to to see how we're just kind of constantly trying to say like, okay, let's push the ball forward, so to speak, but then let's see well, because honestly, I don't know if we know what the effects long term are of modern day like things like marijuana on our health, right? I mean, our data set is grandma and grandpa who, smoked a little ganja in the 60s. But again, like I said, that's a fraction of what the average
Right.
18-year-old can get these days.
Well, there was it was a few months ago now, I think, but the New York Times did a very extensive article on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome.
What is that?
Well, that's what my daughter had, which we were extremely fortunate to find out. She had medical prescription for medical. So this is interesting in terms of this whole conversation. But we were really lucky to she was cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is basically extreme nausea,
Mm.
um, and cyclical vomiting. Now she
When you
didn't.
have when you consume marijuana?
Well, it comes from chronic use over an extended period of time, which is it's pretty rare, but the chances of it happening are through that chronic use, and especially for people who have prescriptions, and then the increased potency, right? So as far as they can tell, it seems it's a because we have cannabinoid receptors in our digestive systems,
Mhm.
so it's something about that. Now, the medical system doesn't know about this, it's so rare because it's been in the dark so much. There is historically written reference to this during the Middle Ages, and the Islamic Renaissance, where there were great physicians who were advanced, and of course they were hashish users. There's documented cases of them, of physicians, Islamic physicians, referencing the occasional patient who has this negative reaction. It's pretty amazing. But so now, I mean, there's people who are going to the emergency room dozens of times, and there's this ironic effect where, of course, cannabis helps reduce nausea. So people, and it will work for the person who has this syndrome, that they'll consume more cannabis, but then that obviously is prolonging the matter. So as soon as she stopped, it was gone. But it was, again, she was lucky that a doctor had heard of this and just mentioned it, and everything fit the bill. And so that's just one example, as you're saying, of I think other effects that we have yet to see come about, because we haven't encountered this before.
So if you take the other side of the coin, another substance that's getting a lot of headlines today is kind of GLP-1s like Ozempic, Wegovy, and things like that, right? And that's a substance too, right? Although it's not creating the same maybe bliss that other substances are happening to, but it's kind of interesting, because I remember the first time I heard about that category of drugs, I, for some reason, just assumed that it was like, oh, that's interesting. It's a thing that just kind of helps burn fat and stuff like that, right? So you can eat whatever you want and you're going to lose weight because it's like helping you burn, basically like an evolution of the diet pill, right? And then I kind of like looked it up and discovered like, no, actually it's not. It's actually a thing that tamps down your internal craving to eat more. They're already looking at early evidence where it might also tamp down your cravings to drink or even gamble. So even like non-food consuming things are doing it. Would you guys try it?
I think so.
Right now, yeah, right now, no. It's
As
just too.
as an overweight man, I've of course asked myself that question. I haven't considered trying it, but in asking the question, it's too new, and it's too, yeah. I mean, I tend to have I tend to have a lot of skepticism around things that are very fashionable. Not a full rejection. It's just like it's so new, and you know, I don't think I would give it a shot yet. I mean, who knows? It's also because of it was unpredicted, right? This was an accidental off-label outcome for the drug. So now the pharmaceutical companies are going all out to develop versions that are specifically for weight loss, right? So maybe
I
the
guess
tech.
is it the
Yeah.
newness or the mechanism? Because like to me, it sort of sounds like it kind of, in a way, makes you skinnier by sucking some of the joy out of your life.
Sure, I think that's a good, yeah.
Yeah.
It has some, and it has some sort of connection to this, what we keep getting at about the meaning, the real meaning that's involved with the hedonic principle. There's something there, and that, yeah, if it's like dissecting that out, that seems.
Well, and what's the greater evil, right? If you are a diabetic and you're in a critical situation as far as weight and effect on your pulmonary and respiratory system, yeah, it's life-saving medicine. So what's the trade-off? And that's pretty good trade-off. You won't enjoy much once you're dead anyway, as far as we know. But in your present form, you're not going to enjoy it much if you die. So for those situations, we don't have a better alternative. Or speaking about your daughter, these are a lot of what we're talking about is oscillating to the goal, right? And like we never have like a critically damped system. We're always like over. So we shoot one way, then we shoot another way, we miss the goal. But we generally get there over time, until a new set point is established. And a lot of this is just about that. It's like finding the point for somebody who's diabetic. This is the best answer currently for them. along with maybe insulin therapy, but it's gotten people off of insulin therapy, which is
Yeah.
miraculous.
Yeah,
I
it's a good
Right.
point. As an almost 50-year-old overweight man, that my mind could change about what I said. It's a sort of a
Sure.
privilege to be able to say
Me too.
no. But I wouldn't do it for vanity reasons. But I would certainly do it for my family, right? If the time comes that it's like this is what you need to do, then of course, yeah, that's for sure the case.
I think it's interesting too, because obviously I think it has its roots in real legitimate diabetic treatment as a therapy. But I sense this kind of notion that it's about to turn a corner and just become a vanity thing, especially with, I mean, I can't open up my phone at all and not see an ad for some form of somebody hawking a GLP-1. And I think, it's probably an interesting commentary on the current state of our society, where one of the hottest drugs that is causing a lot of the drug companies that are making them, they're causing their stock to just skyrocket.
Mm,
And the whole kind of point of the drug is to help people tamp down their temptations and kind of look better, feel better, right? And so that's just so interesting to me that, like, the second biggest thing, you talk about on the people talk about in the stock market, first thing is AI, and then the second thing is usually GLP-1s, right? And so I don't know. I think they've kind of unearthed like a nerve clearly where people are like, that sounds amazing, you know?
We're still obsessed with this uh, kind of a narcissistic outside perspective of what we are. I mean, but on the other side of that, you can watch a football game and see, Titans on the line who are 6'10", have size 18 feet, who are healthier, fitter, faster than anybody and then on the other side of that, or even there's have you guys followed Alona Mar, the rugby player, the female rugby
Oh,
player?
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Big.
Sure.
So, here's a gal. She's probably around 6 foot and 210 pounds. Previously, I remember talking about Gabriella Reese when I was a kid with my friends, and oh, she's so beautiful, she's so hot, and I'd say, what do you think that she weighs? And they'd say, oh, probably 105, 110, because she was fit. And I would say, no, she's there's no way that she's not 200 pounds or just shy of it. She's 6'1", and she's looks like she's carved out of marble.
Hmm.
And they would say, no, she can't. She'd be so fat. There's no way. And now you're seeing more and more that people are starting to understand that our health isn't tied to this. We went from Botticelli bodies to, the Twiggy heroin look, or Kate Moss, or this all oscillates back and forth, right? But in the end, starting to understand that that's not the best. And I hope as this oscillates its way, because the other thing you see when you open your phones is the speculation about everybody, all the celebrities, whether they're on it or off it. They lost so much weight, they look fantastic, they look too skinny, that whatever it is. But there's all this speculation, and I hope we oscillate through that stage, and it just becomes a needed therapy for people who it does well with, just like cannabinoids for your
Yeah.
daughter. It's
Right.
not the
Right.
right thing for her, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope that it finds the people that it is the right thing
Yeah.
for them,
Right.
and
Yeah.
not.
I think you're getting at it. What I was sort of my point about what's fashionable is that it ideas of beauty are obviously
Hmm.
range widely throughout history and human and cultures, right? And so, but it's very particular to our culture currently in the modern age that things come on that fast and become
Yeah.
instantly widespread. And then, as you're saying, like this is not about. And I was thinking as you were saying that, like I wouldn't. I'm disinclined to judge any one person who decides to do it because I don't know. I have no idea what their reasons are or what their needs are or the complexity around that. Because for sure, in every single case, it is a complex situation, right? And so, yeah, and because of that, that's why as a fashionable thing where it takes off. Um, uh, all we can do is, give it time, and as you say, hope and support as much as any one person can, that process moves along, and the greater good will be borne out over time.
They're on their journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you guys are both prolific, highly prolific in kind of creating culinary experiences and things like that. And when you think about kind of the evolving landscape, maybe away from alcohol a little bit, and the addition of all these other substances, like what do you think kind of menus are going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years, with kind of the introduction of potentially new, marijuana to menus, or psychedelics even, or on the other side, like half the population's on Ozempic? Like, I don't know. How do you guys look at how you would want to create a meal for the future of all these different substances that are entering society?
Well, years ago, there was that craze with Olean, right?
What's Olean?
The large molecule fats that the body
soy-based, right?
Yeah.
Oh yes.
So you'd pass them, but it gave, people eventually didn't go with it because it gave them, loose bowel movements and
yes, it did,
and all those things. So it weeded itself
sounds
out.
like a knowing smile, Ben.
Yeah. Hey,
one time was all it took. No more Olean, please.
But white tuna does the same thing, escalar.
Oh, right, sure. Yeah.
And it's fantastic.
Wait, what? White tuna makes you number 2?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And
what
orange,
do you mean?
Butterfish.
Orange oil.
I don't go out and I don't eat like a bag of escalar.
Yeah, I do.
I'll be right back. I got to change my dinner reservation.
So, we've already kind of done it, but I would like to answer a question, and to tie in some of the things that we've just talked about. What is that? We've all had a ton of food, and some things that are inadvisable to have in the quantities we've had them. And we've done it in company. I can think of church Christmas dinners when I was a kid, and eating so many pierogi and stuffed cabbage and all these things. Or, Ramp Fest or any of the gatherings, some of the events that I do on the beaches. We eat too many lobster rolls, too much steak. And yet the camaraderie of the experience, and the whatever the good chemicals are that come from the endorphins of community, you don't feel it at all. Next day you feel like $1 million. But if you were to do that, and I don't want to be so bold as to speak for all of us, but I will. We've all also done that alone at home, trying to capture that magic. Oh, if it worked then, this will cheer me up now. And you do it, and you feel awful the next day, bloated. Nothing's moving properly. And I think, what are the chemicals that allow us to process optimally our food? Is Ozempic is the only reason it works that it's slowing us down from eating? But what if we can process optimally? What if we could find something that gets our endorphin levels, our serotonin levels, dopamine, everything in a place where we can eat and absorb optimally and perform optimally on nearly anything? Is that the future? So I think all of these substances in combination with each other, they can all provide some of this. So I think it's going to, again, an oscillation of experimenting with things, all of these things, to find how does that augment a menu so people can enjoy the most in the most beneficial way, with the least negative connotations to it and the least negative side effects.
I think that's what everyone's going to, and I think that's where especially a lot of the movement away from alcohol is, especially for people that are getting a little older and they can't bounce back from a hangover anymore, is I think something in the mental calculus just says, well, okay, yes, I drink a bunch and then I get kind of a positive bump, to my mood or feeling, and I have a lot of fun. But, the hangover's so bad that it's just not worth it anymore, right? And I think everybody, maybe some people never reach that conclusion, but I feel like that's where a lot of that is coming from. This kind of, and I don't think there's any accident that it's dry January. Not well, I guess they have sober October too, but I don't really get why that's. I think they're just looking for rhyming things. But dry January makes a lot more sense to me than sober October, because like what the hell happened in August or September? I don't know, but dry January makes sense to me. And maybe like to your point about you're already seeing a lot of people wear like continuous glucose monitors, right? And that just measures kind of one thing, glucose. But sure, it's like conceivable to think that somebody could use some of these scanning technologies to say like, I need precisely 7 milligrams of THC and 4 ounces of alcohol. That's 110 proof and 9 ounces of protein. But
Oh, that reminds me of the what is the guy's name? The tech guy who there's a Netflix documentary called, I
Bryan
think,
Johnson,
yeah. That was hard. That's hard to watch. I couldn't finish it because, and I want to, I will finish it, but my sort of conclusion was like, he's mentally ill, I think, but
yeah,
he's doing a good
yeah,
thing for society. Like that will presumably produce data that's valuable, but it's not going to produce a regimen that you're going to get, because he's so removed the things about life that make life beautiful. And I don't just mean, getting intoxicated. I mean the randomness and the, you know, and relationships. It's so committed to this thing, which has a virtuous intent to it. It's crazy. Anyway, and like that. So this optimization and dialing things in is it's like anything else. It has positive effects, and then it sucks the life out of things too.
you hit a nerve for me. I haven't seen the documentary, but I've read quite a bit about Bryan Johnson, and that guy really rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
Like it just, I get it. Like he's kind of guinea pigging himself, but like I don't think that. I get very skeptical of a human who has the hubris to think that they can outlast death. As
And
idyllic
there's
as,
that. I mean,
and honestly, I don't know if even if you could outbeat death, like, I don't know. I don't want that.
Dude,
well, here's this reminds me. Right, I don't want that. Here's the thing that struck me after I watched the whatever 30 minutes of I watched it was that, I mean, he has a few people around them, but they're all employees and they're all devoted to this extreme regimen. Um, and it's become, I mean, it's widely accepted now and well studied that the most significant indicator of longevity is your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Spouses, friends, enormously, and that goes back to what we've touched on repeatedly in this conversation is the way community happens around, you know, the experiencing pleasure in all its forms. And this guy's is there, and he's essentially removed that the most significant factor in longevity from the equation.
I agree, and I would say, let's say best case, he actually discovers some immortality pill. But I think I would only take it if I get all of my best friends to take it as well too. So if you guys are going to take an immortality pill, I will too, and we'll just eat lobster rolls forever because we're never going to die, right?
Have
I
you
mean,
ever have you guys ever seen the movie Get Low with Bill Murray and Robert Duvall?
no, haven't.
That's so great. Robert Duvall is this kind of old crank of a hermit who lives back in the woods. Bill Murray ends up kind of helping him plan his own funeral, and Robert Duvall's character goes to his own funeral. That's what we'll do. If we get this longevity pill, we'll do that with all of each. We'll take turns planning each other's funerals and then attending our own funeral.
I absolutely love it. Okay, well, that's a good segue. Speaking of good friends we like to spend time with, we are about to have our first guest on here. I'm gonna let him in a second here. Hey, Michael
There he is.
Cirino, how are you?
Holler. I'm awesome.
Hi,
dude.
how you doing, man? Can you hear
How
us?
are you
You
guys?
good? Hey, welcome.
I can hear
So
you okay.
welcome. Welcome, Michael Cirino. You are our first guest. We've been talking for a little bit here. You know Ben. I think you know Charles as well too. But we're about to get to know each other in a little bit, and so we've just been kind of showing the fat about the future of hedonism and things like that. Oh, you disappeared, Michael.
Just unplug that camera real quick. It's about to
Okay, all
follow up.
right. Well, we'll stretch this out a little bit.
Right back.
Yada 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 yada.
There you go.
Well, anyway, Michael, welcome. How you doing?
How's it going? So you guys are the crew that has this podcast on a regular basis, or are we all guests on your world, Michael, today?
All guests. I think my idea is to try to have some different co-hosts every time. So every episode kind of has a different kind of vibe and feel to it. But yeah, so we've been talking about the future hedonism. You were one of the first people I thought of to get on here as an interview. So welcome here. Let's jump right into it. You co-founded or founded and run the House of Attention, amongst many other things. Your past/current project, A Razor Shiny Knife, super groundbreaking kind of creative group in the culinary and experience world. Why don't you tell us a little bit, who are you and what's the House of Attention?
When you reached out to me about the hedonism thing, it really kind of felt, synergistic, because I think my art is hospitality and experience design, and I think hedonism is one of these things that we think of as like a activation of all the senses, and over the top, like gifting to an individual of service that has all of these different layers. And I kind of look at that orchestration of experience design as an art form, as a storytelling bit. And I think as we digitize things, it gets more and more gamified, right? Whether it be from the point that somebody buys a ticket, or to the point that somebody learns about an organization, a piece of intellectual property, a storytelling platform, a community, whatever it is, something they can become passionate about, learn more about, how they dive into it. That moment that they dive in, that's the House of Attention to me. That's the place where they are in a world where media experiences and artifacts are valuable to them because they're entertaining, not because they're marketing or because they're some other person's value, right? And once somebody enters into that House of Attention, it is by definition a hedonistic experience, because everything is pleasurable, right? If you love whiskey and you start going into the House of Attention around whiskey, and you start learning more about the Upper Highlands and Scotch, and all of that knowledge is going to get you into a place of better enjoyment of the thing that you came here to learn about and to love. And I think I built House of Attention around the 100 course meal, which for me was this idea of a culinary theme park, right? With china and crystal instead of just on paper plates in a parking lot, right? And how do we do culinary tastings at scale? How do we do things with high touch? And I realized it was, what it needed was something much more like a record label and way less like an agency. So I started trying to figure out which pieces needed to come over from the freelancing world, from the agency world, to synthesize the brand needs, the audience needs, the producers needs, so that you could create those hedonistic moments and have them be scalable or repeatable, or something that actually can sustain the intentional people that are behind that decision making.
Walk us through what the 100 course meal was, because I think that's a really good example. And, like from a point of view of like a guest, like what does that look like, when what is the 100 course meal?
Am I allowed to share my screen on this thing?
We had a little trouble with it, but you can try.
Let me see if I don't give anybody seizure.
Also, there's going to be ear-only versions of this too. So, oh, hey, look at that.
Yeah, so the 100 course meal to me was, I don't know, make it pretty for a second here for you guys, was this idea of culinary events typically try to reach some kind of like large scale. We've got 100 chefs coming. It's New York Food and Wine Festival. You can sample all this shit, right? And it's always like really executed in a very like substandard way that you'd want it to be executed, right? It's like in a parking lot. It's like hot. There's too many people. The chefs are cutting stuff up on a standing table. I mean, Charles, I don't know. I'm sure if you know these guys, you've done exactly what I've just said. Cook stupid amounts of food with a ton of components in it for a bunch of celebrity chefs in a kitchen that doesn't make any sense, and then hand it to them in a paper cup, right? And like, I just didn't want to do it, and I wanted to I wanted to make it nice, right? I wanted us all to have this stuff that we would want to heat lamps and like plancha and like time. And I also was like at the point that we thought of this, which was like 2012 or 13. The fat duck, ibuli. All that stuff was just like at 11, everybody was just fawning over themselves at 50-course meal, 75. Oh my God, I can't believe there's all these amuse-bouches that taste like sand. And like, I just
This
was
was
like,
your amp. This amp goes to 11 moment, I think.
well, that was the whole idea. It was just like, so from like,
Yeah.
as a guest, you want to say like, hey, what did you do last night? And you'll be like, I went to a 100 course meal. And be like, fuck, what did that look like? Right. And I made it so that it looked like this, right? Which this is a 150-foot long table, 45 meters for people outside of the United States. And
Thank you for that.
Yeah, 1,200 dishes on it, right? And the 1,200 dishes represented all 100 courses, right? You can't just, there's 10 seats at one end of the table, and then there's all these servings, right? And this is another view of it because there was a balcony there. I designed that room right around that gigantic monolith for a couple reasons. Reason one is the title, like lobs up the ball. Hey, what did you do last night? I went to a 100-course meal. And then that photo, this one right here, comes through and is just like, this is what it looks like, right? And it looks like this insane shit. Now, I built the room, so it was up to fire code, but also there's only 2 meters on each side of the table that you had to get by to get to the other set activation. So if Ben and I wanted to go to the fucking whiskey tasting, we had to walk by there. We wanted to go to the other thing. We had to walk by here again. So what does that mean? Every 2 minutes, dishes disappeared. So people had to take this photo 10, 15, 20 times throughout the course of the night and look different every single time. The whole rest of this party, though, was just a fucking dope-ass food and wine festival with celebrity chefs doing celebrity chef stuff and us making, like, cool demos that tied to, like, art drops and, like, pieces around the room. And I got to play with liquid nitrogen. We did it in the morning, in the afternoon, or in an evening seating. So we did coffee tastings. We had a speakeasy hitting in the back there. I brought the drone bartender, the food laser, the liquid nitrogen, all the shit, right? So this was like one of those things, but it was designed so that when we made it, people dug it as a food person, right? That table, you were like, holy shit, I'm going to take this photo. And then when you looked at that table and you saw all this stuff in the room, you were like, man, as a guest, there's no way in fuck I'm going to eat a 100-course meal. Right? Like my job now is that I'm not here to eat. I'm watching them serve a 100-course meal, right? Like if it was the 4 of us cooking the food, we are, the football team on the pitch, playing the game. You don't expect to go to to see the Detroit Lions and get on the field and play with them, right? Mike, you expect to watch them play, right? So the 100-course meal, that huge table, also rectified that situation in everybody's mind. Oh, when somebody says, did you get to eat 100 courses of food? You just show them this thing and you're like, right? And that same energy that the guest wanted, it was really easy for us to close all of our sponsors and to get them integrated so that both our publisher, who licensed the idea from us, right, and the people that they went and sold all their sponsor to, they were like, fuck, I can see my brand in this cool thing. Let me give you a bunch of money and let me sponsor a chunk of it because I feel like you're going to do a good job of representing my awesomeness as well as this cool thing for the people that are there. Thanks for letting me talk so much.
You did I remember this, of course, I remember this a ton and remember when you told me all about it, however many years ago, but I never associated it with, until now, the way, Rampfest has come to be because it's gotten so big. There's too much food happening for anyone to possibly eat all of it. And it's just pure chaos, right? But you basically, came up with a very carefully designed system to organize that. So the same kind of explosion of variety and and organize it in a way that it created a much more specific kind of experience. There was much more of a hospitality kind of experience, and all of the content and amazingness that can come out of that. So.
What we did here was we gave you the ability to choose if you wanted to be on a track or if you just wanted to discover stuff. But if you were like, I want to be on this thing, we gave people bracelets and they would vibrate and they would be like, yo, that thing that you want to do is happening over here in 10 minutes. Do you want to come? And they'd be like, maybe, maybe not. It's a 5-hour event, man. Like that's how that shit works, right? So sometimes you just got to give people advice and kind of steer them in a direction and not necessarily like beat them over the head. But I personally, and I don't know how you guys feel, I consider food an art form for me because I like the dynamic of the chef and the guest in the dining relationship. It's one of those things that, as hospitality goes, in very few places does the more the guests spend, the less physical control they have over their body, and the more they give it over to the chef to do whatever the hell they want to do with them. Do you know what I mean? It's like a very weird S&M kind of thing with money.
Well, and I think when you do something as audacious as the 100-course meal, by definition, that is not a thing that you can't do without a community of people involved, right? Like that doesn't. I mean, that's kind of bonkers for a single person to say, "I'm going to go by myself to the 100-course meal and just have it alone in a room," right? That's it. It kind of forces you to have a community to be like, "How are we going to eat these 1,200 plates?" And I think part of like I think the big thing that all four of us is because all four of us have done our own version of dinner and culinary events in our own different ways. And I think I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I always felt like as opposed to like running a restaurant where the user kind of picks what they want from the menu and they're all sitting on their own isolated table, there's something cool about everyone's riding the same plane, you know, everyone's whatever the menu is, whether it's 100 courses or 3 courses, there's something kind of that lubricates the social interaction when everyone's going on the same conversation, they're sitting at the same table, and things like that, kind of happen. So I don't know, how do you guys kind of feel about that? Like what gives you guys pleasure about that?
Well, for that really my whole shtick or shtick or thinking about food and these meals, these moments as being a placemaking exercise. What you just said is that, right? Like, and of course I'm thinking it through the architect lens, that architecture is placemaking and shelter is a placemaking activity, and food and shelter are inextricably tied together. That's what that is, and that place, um, in this age where we mix and interact and travel to go eat and get around people who we don't know, but get in. How did you put it? Get on the same plane. Is that what you said? Well,
Yeah.
you're getting on the same plane with people you don't know, which is not anthropologically not what really would happen, but the food communicates that. The hospitality then becomes the glue that means that this moment that will never exist again because it's super unique and these combination of people won't hang out again, it still is filled and pulsing with meaning. Um, the way, well, not the same way, but sort of with the same level of, in a very different way, but the same kind of potency that sitting down to a holiday meal with people you do know has an impact.
Yeah. Well, so Michael, we started off this episode by kind of going around and saying, what does hedonism mean to you? So I'll pose that to you. What does hedonism mean to you?
I mean, I think it's like a total indulgence in a specific topic, that has attachment to your physicality, but is also like a passion-driven thing that like motivates you, right? Like most of the time, people think about it as a carnal pleasure, right? Like sex or food or something like that. It can be, but I mean, I see it a lot in sport, even though I'm not somebody who really understands sports ball as much as other people. Like I understand passionate culture and fandom, and emerging fandoms, right? Like because the idea of, for me, hedonism is to say, like, I care about this thing and I want to gather with people that care about this thing in a way that allows me to be as pure about the thing that I care about as possible, and couple to the ground state, right? Whether that be, again, anime or whatever the fuck it is, right? It doesn't really matter. Olive oil, or being able to play with old vintage tube amps or whatever the fuck it is, right? There's a place where there is a nexus of my level of knowledge, my ability to execute that thing, and my ability to absorb new information and push myself into a creative way. That to me is where hedonism exists. And I think as we become wealthier as a society, more and more people want to live in a hedonistic version of society more and more of the time that they have, and they want to dedicate their attention to things that provide them that kind of physical and neurochemical feedback loop, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How do you want to evolve the state of hedonism going forward in the future with the work that you're doing, Mike?
Personally, I think that the only way for it to survive is through intentional existence. And I think that as we start seeing like computers and AI do all like the middleware of like creativity and stuff like that, the execution and the intention behind the execution is going to be a lot of it. And I think that when you're building ecosystems that have intentional purpose, that creates a center of gravity that drives people that have a similar feeling towards that thing. Like Disney does this, right? Disney makes a center of gravity that's like, you like all these characters? That's super cool. Boom, come down here. There's going to be fucking 300 hours of content for you to fuck around with. try it out, like fucking deal with it. And they're like, do you have something for people yeah, we do, we got it. And we've got flowers, and we've got all the food to service this people, and we
Yeah.
build all of these airports around here, and that ecosystem is scalable up and down. You can do it at Disney, you can do it in Jeddah and in Mecca for the Hajj. You can do it, you know what I mean? You can place make in fucking the Catskills, or where do we want to do? You know what I mean? Like, who the fuck cares? You just put a point somewhere, and if you do something awesome there, people will want to go there because it's awesome. That intentionality is, I think, the thing that hedonism is going to drive towards, right? It's not going to matter that this is the best whiskey. It's the best whiskey this guy made on this day because.
Yeah, that's really, I like that idea, and I never thought about intentionality as a sort of cultural technology until you put it that way, Cirino. That it's the thing. I agree with you 100%. And I think it's the thing that helps solve for the issue of too many options, right? In our most of human existence, you didn't have options. You had to do the things you had to do, and hedonism's role in that was very different, right? And it was still there. It's always been there, the pleasure principle, but it didn't matter if you were good at hunting or not, or good at making moccasins or not. The list is endless, right? Everyone had to do it to survive, and so the idea of intentionality was probably not an idea like that. Again, that's an innovation that emerges from existing in a time when you have all these options, and you can be into whiskey. Again, all the things you listed, and the infinitude of others that exist as well.
I would also just say, just to kind of like respond to that last bit, the modern culture gives us the ability to both absorb global news and horrific things happening on a near infinite basis instantaneously. It also gives us that same kind of infinite knowledge across all sorts of histories of people working with like blowing crystal. And I think blowing crystal as a civilizational thing is a thing. You hit a point where people are like, I got to know how to do glass. What if I start putting other metals in the glass and I start making it into something that's different than glass, right? And then we evolve a bunch of craftsmen that do that shit, right? But then we do it differently in China and Japan and Switzerland and Germany. And we do it differently in all these different places, right? But we now have an ability to go across the entire global structure and say, this is the best version of how this looks in the Appalachian Mountains with the materials that they have on hand, with the skill set that we have as fucking people. And if they want to employ a multi-tiered kiln system that runs up the side of a mountain that uses local found coal as the heat source, sweet. If they want to use, class 4 lasers heating a fucking xenon gas mixture because that's how they're going to get the temperature, both of them should be fully fucking functionally similar, but the intention and the reason why will separate products coming from the same store with the same resources with the same shit. I don't necessarily know if it's going to define which one is like, 5-star versus 2-star or whatever the quality matches.
What I hear you saying is that it's it's about the process. I mean, the end result is important, not unimportant, but like within the intentionality, there's pleasure in the process. It's
making the mistakes, I guess, and figuring out how to get to the version of perfection, right? Because like in an educational field where AI can teach us how to do anything at a flawless level, and I want to learn how to ferment stuff as well as they do it at Noma. It's not knowledge, it's execution. And it's deciding which type of execution you're going to do and get good at through trial and error. And I guess that's part of what that hedonistic journey is. How do you want to spend your free time, and how do you want it to progress your passion points and make you a better you?
Yeah, I think for me, like all throughout history, we've always been, we leap forward on the backs of visionaries. This ties into substances too, that bringing more people, opening up the world for people and perspective. As Mike was talking about, the information making us aware of other ways to do things, but also the amalgamation of visionaries at this point. We think about, even just to go to music, contemporary rock music, somebody like Prince was singular, but he has born thousands like him, that it's recognizable, and people now recognize this because he was able to get out to enough people that they realize, oh, actually, I can play 18 instruments too, and I can, and that previously it wasn't possible to do that. And I think there's across almost every discipline, what Mike is talking about with execution, it's not an inspiration, it's an execution. We all have this infinite ability to reach out into the knowledge sphere and pluck things out, and to hopefully serve the greater good. But we're barreling forward at an exponential rate on all of that, which is beautiful. Like you don't go crazy about, oh, this is, but there are some people who go like, there'll never be another Prince. And it's true, there will never be another Prince. But there is, like he said, there's a Catskills version, there's an Appalachian version, there's a K-pop version. Like there's all these expressions of that same inspiration. Could
we say could we say, in as far as that kind of thinking, that the future of hedonism is increasing connectivity
yes.
to a specialization? What we're talking about is the ongoing process of specialization, right? And so because of people having access to doing things creatively and connecting with each other in pleasurable ways, and then the information ecosystem continues to become more and more complex. Hedonism is sort of driving that process. If we agree on,
I think to the point, I think hedonism is actually the filter for creativity, right? Because I think an artist, a visionary, especially in food and the fine arts, and stuff like that, you don't really rise to prominence necessarily if you can't create a hedonic sensation for other people, right? So in a sense, it's kind of the filter. And I think, we started this conversation early on about saying, like, is hedonism actually necessary for survival? And I guess you could say chemically, maybe not, but to make a life that modern civilization values is worth living, maybe it is, right? I mean, because otherwise we're just gonna eat our gruel and live like Bryan Johnson till 500 and suck all the life out of everything. We had a big rant about Bryan Johnson before you got on, Mike. Do you know about that guy?
Since we're back to him, have you guys ever seen, Ben mentioned movies. Have you ever seen the later Alien movies like Prometheus and those?
No.
So that guy, he looks so much like Peter Weyland.
Yes.
Like frighteningly so. And that was the exact same thing he was up to. And it's wild. I'm waiting for him to come out with his own David. So we'll see.
I would love for that guy to live to 500, man. I think that would be fantastic. And I think that the people that keep him alive to 500 would love it. And I think it would be one of those things that if civilization would be around for him to stay to 500, I think that would be awesome also. But like, I think his challenge is really going to come when civilization crumbles into dust sometime soon. Is he still going to be able to have all those medicines procured for him, or is he going to have to build his own fermentation laboratory and synthesis laboratory so he can get all those vitamins and whatever the fuck he sticks them? Because that does this huge supply chain, and there's an enormous amount of like avarice behind being able to say things like that, which I want him to be able to continue to do, because I think medicine of all works is awesome and should extend life. But like at the end of the day, man, that shit's bananas. You know what I mean? And it's an enormous amount of work in the same way that like turning like cassava flour into a goldfish cheddar cracker and calling it like healthy, because because instead of using flour or whatever it is, it's like these are processed things, man. These are processed life. It's a highly processed kind of existence with inputs and outputs that don't look anything like what we created. I don't know how hedonistic that is, but if that's his version of hedonism, fuck yeah, man, let him get after it if he's got the money for it. You know what I mean? I'm sure we'll all learn from it somehow. You know what I mean?
That's pretty much what I was saying about it. Yeah, like it's monstrous and grotesque to me watching it, but good for him. Like he's doing something seemingly. It's hard to wrap my head around. Have you heard of the term? I've heard it, but I refreshed myself on it today. The hedonic treadmill.
Whoa, what is that?
The psychological notion that's well observed that basically humans tend to return to sort of when major events happen that have major emotional impact, positive or negative, we tend to return to a stasis. And I think that principle gets around or speaks to likely what you're just saying about do we need hedonism to survive? I think that it's sort of this thing that was always pulling us along, right? In sort of any historic context, it looks different 5,000 years ago than it does today, than it does 10 years from now. But um, and yeah, we're always sort of walking down the path, being drawn by that.
What do you guys think about kind of, ever since the launch of kind of social media, kids especially, but everybody, I think, has gotten accustomed to this idea that the world should be crafted in my vision, meaning I can only see stuff I want to see. And maybe that's probably extending to I only want to enjoy things the way I want to enjoy them and stuff like that. I mean, what do you guys make of that? And, where do you think that's headed? Like this idea of the tension between me, and the commons.
It's dangerous. It's always been dangerous, because again, just to get back to simple genetics, anything that limits our diversity and spread across the genome is not advisable for our survival as a species. Mike was talking about our eventual demise, and that's how it will come. If it does, is total regulation of every single thing, so that only one person's viewpoint wins out.
I mean, even if you had a inverse structure of that, where everybody got to live in their own fantasy world, it would be a similar existence at the end of the day, right? Because no one would have to share facts anymore. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a weird situation that we're living in, where like truth doesn't matter as much anymore. But I don't know if it ever did, man. Like this is one of those things that's just like we have lots of truth now all the time, and we didn't have as much truth before, and it was easier to ignore. And like truth is just a really convenient thing when people want it to be, and it's just an inconvenient thing when it's not, and it's just like I also know it's just like drinking a fire hose of truth is fucking exhausting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, how do you think that shapes the future? How do you think that shapes the future of like food stuff and food experience stuff? I mean, that idea, is it just kind of we got more niches to kind of cater to, or do we still believe in the idea that we can get a critical mass behind a singular idea around a celebration of food, a way of looking at food or enjoyment?
I think creating food culture is something that we're going to be doing an enormous amount of as food availability changes and rituals start to exist. I think the issue that I have is that there's nobody that exists as an entity such as the church or the state of Islam or whoever you want to put in there as a near infinite consistent source of cultural generation that says, hey, you guys are just fishermen. That's cool. Fish is fucking awesome. Our main character loves fish. We're going to have a party for fish. Right. And like, we don't do that shit anymore. We don't do that shit for Chelsea United. We don't say like Chelsea makes fish and we're going to be fucking fish eaters. So our stadium's going to have fish and chips because there's no connection between the consumption, the ritual, the production of whatever. And there's no consistency over time with any of these things because we have near infinite resources. So we have to figure out how to couple a consistent, repetitive, ritualistic gathering structure with things that allow for a base level of humanity to celebrate what is available to everyone in a unique and interesting way. And we're not generating that because we don't have the limitation in the same way. So we have to enforce that in ourselves. And then we have to enforce it for a minimum of a generation or four. Do you know what I mean? So that it becomes something that's valuable, right? And we're getting close there with nationalized sports. I think the NFL is pretty close to it. College football is pretty close to it in the U.S. You can look at the English Premier League or the Copa Europa kind of stuff in the World Cup. But there's a couple different modern versions of this that are working. I just don't know if how they are like local they are, or how cultural, subcultural they get. You know what I mean? Like,
isn't this? I feel like the effects of the new sincerity are have crept in a lot into food. It took time. Like the new sincerity was, bronies are one of the original examples of this. The people, anyone can find their tribe, right? And it's no longer what preceded the new sincerity was irony and doing things, stylistically for ironic purposes. Well, that kind of has gone away, and so now, I mean, it's the kind of food trends that are, to me, represent that emerging out of social media. Like my kids and the the little shop that opened up in town. That, what is it called? I sent you guys pictures of it. These crazy, colorful mixes of like ramen. It's savory and sweet, and it's ice cream, and it's smoothies, and it's ramen, but it's a a Latin run little shop. Like, and there's a multitude of examples of this. It's all sincere, and it moves very fast, and it's hard for older people to understand from any level, including from the palate even. I feel like that's sort of and I think I mean, it's that reality is producing the does that start to overwhelm traditional ways of going about food, right? Because I feel like there's this acceleration of combining methods and ingredients and into these wonderful new delicious things. But and authenticity is still very valued, but also people are starting to grow weary of the term authenticity. Um, and
Well,
and
it
Yeah.
becomes a pissing contest of who's the most authentic, and that's just kind of an arms race that ends up going nowhere, right? I mean, I think while you mentioned the super maxable kind of flavors of that Mexican spot, the one thing I've noticed in just like my Instagram feed of looking at the evolution of how restaurants like to plate their food, and Michael, your slideshow from 100 Course Meal kind of like maybe remind this, like I, I think we all remember, and Michael, I know you do because we collaborated on a lot of this stuff. Like, let's call it the early 2000s when like the Alinea of the world were kind of like the hot stuff.
Mhm.
And this whole like every plate, especially from those kinds of restaurants, looked like a terrarium, and it looked like a terrarium with like 92 ingredients on it, and it was all about. And then we've all kind of watched the old Marco Pierre White 1980s shows where like that Baroque style of plating where there's just like everything's
Sauce.
vertical,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
and just a ton of
yeah.
sauce. I've noticed recent,
Radial.
yeah, just weird shapes and Swiss dots and all that stuff. But like I've noticed like recently the kind of more, I don't know, in vogue plating style is just like the thing on a plate. That's it. Like here's a chicken thigh in the middle, and here's like just a little dab of sauce in there, and middle. And so I don't know, I kind of pick up on that and kind of think like, is that just like a repulsion of the previous like crazy plating we had, or are people trying to just be more honest with their food and say, look, it looks like a chicken thigh, but I spent a lot of time on this thing tastes delicious. Like, I don't know, have you guys picked up on that as well too, and like what do you guys think of that?
I think some of it's is honestly just like staffing and time. There's it's really when you see like when what's his name does the Oscars.
Wolfgang
There's
Puck.
200
Wolfgang
chefs.
Puck.
Yeah, Wolfgang Puck. He's doing that's 200 chefs from his restaurants all around the world to crank out that 1,800 person dinner, and at a level that it's like going to a wedding. I went to a wedding at a 3 Michelin star restaurant, 250 person wedding. I did not get 3 Michelin star restaurant food. I got 3 Michelin star catering from the restaurant food. And I
Yeah.
think more people realized, oh, yeah, they were able to afford, they were able to charge more because they had these spectacular dishes. But really, the end execution was about the flavor and the deliciousness. We can do the flavor and deliciousness. We can't do 400 dots of green sauce like Paul Bocu's, but we can do the deliciousness. So let's do that and provide that experience, because in the end, that's the experience. Sure, you eat with your eyes first. That's the spareness on the middle of the plate and all that lends to that. But you still get the execution and the deliciousness without having to have 17 people touch that plate.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a good insight. It's just labor and staffing.
Yeah.
Like a lot of restaurants probably realize like, hey, we got a guy over there that's just chopping chives. Like, do we really need that?
Not well either. He's probably not doing them that well if you rated them at the end of the day.
One of my favorite Instagram accounts is account that's called Rate My Chives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know why I
8.2.
like it, but It's just people submit photos of their chives.
I just sent, maybe you sent it in our thread, but I immediately sent it to Jason DeMera, who's a old school HDC guy who can kind of cook. But there was one event at Ironbound where I said, here, cut these chives. And he came back to me and I looked at him, and you all know that I don't really give a shit that much. But I looked at him and I was like, did you cut these with a cold rock? What? So that's, so.
Oh, you said crush these chives.
Yeah. So I sent him the rate my chives thing. Yeah. That'll never go away.
That's amazing.
No, go ahead, Charlie.
I was thinking what Michael was talking about, the what we consider hedonistic or exotic. Sometimes things become quotidian, right? And we don't derive the same pleasure or excitement from them. And somebody else's quotidian can become our exotic. You go and have a pig roast on the beach in Hawaii, a luau or something like that. Or a clam bake in Maine, right?
Pasta anywhere in Italy.
The first time you served us surf clams at the Ballers retreat.
And I'd been making that dish for 20 years. So I think that, or our conversation about every culture having fried rice, right? These are the things that I think, in a way, every time when I have delicious new experience, and the deliciousness is a metaphor, right? It can be with a person explaining astrophysics. I have a friend who's a high-level coffee guy who writes about coffee, but he's an astrophysicist by trade. And I love talking with him about this because he can bring depth to this that I don't have. I would like to know more, but I don't have the time to pursue it because I'm pursuing the things that I'm doing. But when we can have that experience at a luau or a clam bake in Maine, we come back to our own thing with a renewed sense of, oh, this is also special. And I think it can bring hedonism back into, for me, growing up with my mother's side all being Polish, realizing that, pierogi and stuffed cabbage and a strawberry soup or something like that, these are all special, or the things we've talked about, when you come from the immigrant culture, smelly food, you always get tamped down by your peers in school and stuff like that. You have smelly food, you eat weird things for breakfast, whatever the thing is. And then when you revisit it and you realize this is beautiful, this is what I've been looking for. And sometimes it's a return home, which I think is beautiful.
I take infinite pleasure in knowing that the food that my parents sent me to school with as a kid that I got made fun of is now food that those same people as adults are waiting in line for. So, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about? Go ahead,
also,
Michael.
don't forget that chicken tenders are also hedonistic at 110% because chicken tenders are evidently the universally accepted food. That's it. I mean, I don't know. Like literally every other kind of fried food is starting to evaporate. Fish and clams and everybody just fries chicken tenders now. And there is a certain interesting hedonistic quality around that formality and simplicity and perfection. And the fact that it is good frozen is insane. You know what I mean? Because that means you can get almost anywhere in the world, you can get good chicken tenders. And if they were touched by Tyson, they're probably going to be delicious. Do you know what I mean?
So we're well into the highbrow, lowbrow dimension of hedonism here.
I have a connection, highbrow to lowbrow, from the same person. There is a guy, his name is Bernard Brulé. He's a financier in Paris. I met him through a young artist program long time ago. And one day I was tasked with cooking for him and their guests. I made a skate dish, and I had a bottle of wine. And Bernard had it seemed like an infinitely valuable wine cellar in his place in Paris. It was amazing. And he came into the kitchen while I was cooking, and he grabbed a $2 bottle of white cooking wine and poured it into a glass and went to taste it. And I was mortified. I was a young guy, and I was, no, Bernard, don't drink that. And he stopped and he looked at me very sagely. He's almost 80 at this point. And he said, Charlie, you must always taste the wine. And he tasted it, and he said, like this in particular, this is like my a very nice table wine, in that day. And now, ubiquitously, we have good wine. This is actually a table wine I would have drank as a child. And later on, so he was telling me, you don't just drink. We at the wedding for his son, we had magnums of Bordeaux or Burgundy that were 34 years old, the age of his son. He bought the wedding for the wine for his son's wedding when his son was born. And so I had this polar experience with wine with him. And then one day McDonald's came up and he said, oh, I would never eat this shit. It's never passed my lips. And he said, how could only animals would eat this? It's disgusting. And I said, Bernard, I love you and you're a very wise guy, but you couldn't be more wrong about it. I said that if I know it's delicious because I've had it, but I also know it's delicious because there's a cadre of scientists specifically making it so delicious that people will eat it despite the negative effects. They will still eat it. And it's so fantastically delicious. And it really changed his thought. He said, I never would think that somebody like you, saying to me. And I said, well, what about the wine? And he said, oh, maybe this is true, but I would still never eat this. He was still French enough to have some standards. Yeah. Sometimes the chives can be cut badly, right?
You almost got them.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that the idea of hedonism doesn't have any socioeconomic barriers.
Yeah.
I think like chicken tenders and ranch and foie gras with a sauterne sauce, they're both pretty good. But,
I mean, and you kind of see, like, I remember most of the time you and I get done cooking, it was taking Bordelaise sauce and putting it on an In-N-Out burger, or it was shaving black truffles and putting it in buffalo sauce. And when truff came out, I was like, we've been doing this since 2004. This shit's garbage. Why didn't they use real truffles? And I think that there's a certain amount of structure there where you're like, well, black truffle hot sauce, even if it's using just truffle extract or kitted synthesis oil, whatever it is, it's still an interesting concept for 99% of the people, right? Absolutely. 99% of the people didn't have access to truffle trimmings because they did a Thomas Keller Grant Achatz thing and went through $4,000 worth of truffles every time they did it. And then we could just make fucking, but that same thing though, the drive behind that was because I was 22 and I ate wings and they were delicious. And you put black truffles in wings and you make really good blue cheese and it's fucking phenomenal. And you want to share that hedonistic quality of being able to say, I fried this chicken phenomenally and I made this sauce phenomenally and everything about it sings at 11, but it doesn't have to. The black truffles aren't the whole thing. It's just it's that synthesis, technique, execution, time, tender, and the details from whence you came.
I love that. So while we're on, I was about to bring up wings. I'm glad you touched on wings with that example. Lowbrow.
Thanks for taking us to the next chapter. This is all about wings, guys.
I don't know how much longer we're talking, but everything's wings from this point forward.
Exactly.
Mike Lee, there was a couple years ago, I forget the total context, but I happened into a conversation. I think you were referring to it as food myths, and one of them was boneless wings. And we all laughed, like the idea, or oxymorons maybe. A boneless wing is a chicken tender, right? And so here's this sort of, and I stand behind that idea. It's ridiculous, and I don't want boneless wings. I'll eat chicken nuggets or chicken tenders, but there's I feel like the French chef here, right? It's important that wings are what wings are, and we can do all the things we can do with them from there, right? But I am offended by the idea of boneless wings, plain and simple.
Can I just retort to that real quick?
It's highbrow for the lowbrow.
There's a pizzeria in town here, and last Super Bowl they had a buffalo wing cook-off thing, and everybody makes buffalo slices around my part of the New York area, and they suck. So I went in and I explained to them how to make buffalo slices, right? And
wait! You just went in and told them how to make their own food? That's awesome.
Okay. Yeah, no. It's there's a long history about how this happened, but I'll get to the point of what Ben's talking about, right? I explained a couple different ways to make delicious buffalo wing slices, and they were all like, that's fucking awesome. We're going to try that. And then I said, what if you fried up a bunch of wings, deboned them, and then put them on the thing? And one of the guys was like, yeah, that's what I was going to do. I'm going to do that one. That's what I want to do. And I got to say, the idea of boneless wings being their own hyper intentional decision, right? Like, I am going to fry these wings to perfection, twist the bones out, pull them apart, and then serve them to you, right? Is in and of itself
That's
something.
okay.
But that's Michelin starred level service, and there's no way
Sure.
Buffalo Wild Wings was doing that for every single consumer that was coming through the door there. You know what I mean?
Well. So I think, before we kind of try to put a ribbon on this, I think like one of the things I wanted to discuss was the future
Blue ribbon
of where we think hedonism is gonna go with food. What do you think is what? Let's start here. What's your most hedonistic meal that you crave?
Can I just say pizza? I mean, just like if it's a warm bread, I think
Is
that's
it
the only
buffalo
thing.
slices?
No, not even like I just like if you hand me warm bread, I'd probably eat a near infinite amount of warm bread in whatever format it came in, biscuits. You know, I mean that's the simplistically that I live in right now. If it had sauce nearby, I would be fucking over the top excited about that as well. But anything that typically comes out of an oven that's under 140 degrees, I'm going to be like, this is fantastic.
Man, my wife Raina made yesterday for my mother-in-law's birthday dinner those. You guys have seen Mike and Charles, those rolls she's making. They're basically like they're these wrapped or how do you rolled up rolls, and she's been just hitting it out of the park with them since before Christmas. Those are, and I'm not. I mean, I love bread. I'm into that, but like her family's goes to town on bread, and these they're really outstanding.
They're kind of like she's making like homemade Pillsbury crescent rolls, sort
Exactly.
of.
Yeah. But the first thing that came to my mind when you asked the question, what would be my most hedonistic meal? It's my favorite. My favorite food experience is Maryland hardshell crab. So it's a different. I'm coming at it. My initial reaction comes at it, I think, differently than Cirino's just did, which is about. I mean, I love the food itself, but it's the overall experience. I find that, and it's this drawn out thing. There's all the work that goes into producing the crabs, which tends to be communal, catching, and even better if you've gone out and caught them yourself, preparing them, dumping them on a table, and then spending 4 or 5 hours eating together, and that's the max for me. I like that a lot.
How about you, Charlie?
It would be something similar to what Ben was saying: shellfish, fish, and shellfish, but from a day on the sea, bringing friends out on the boat, teaching, collaborating, and making our way. Harvesting things from the sea, getting together on the beach afterwards, grilling, cooking, and then the other one is whole pigs have a special place for me. When I was a kid, my mom invited me. I was young. She invited me to a party with her friends, and it sounded really boring. And I wanted to stay at home and play with my brother and, probably chase each other around the kitchen with cleavers and fool around and stuff like that. But we, when she came back, she told me about the story of the party, and she said, "Oh, you missed it. There was a whole pig and the whole thing, the apple in the mouth, everything." And I'd only seen that in like a cartoon, and that sounded really special and fancy to me. I'd missed an opportunity, and where I was from, especially when you're young, in the community that I was from, it felt like I might never get the opportunity to do that again. I missed something that was above my station. And so every time, no matter what the trimmings around the occasion are, but every time with a whole roasted pig, whether it's on a cage at Ramp Fest or it's from the ground at a luau, or when we do them from big when we do 4 at a time from big smokers, and at barbecue competitions and things like that, that always holds a really special place to me too, because of that prior experience. But I think being on the beach like I did growing up, again, this experience that we did because we didn't have, we couldn't order the experience in. We went and made the best of what we could and enjoyed it. And now it's become something so special to me.
I think
That
it's interesting. You touched on this idea of like you're kind of hinting at the nostalgia as a little bit a part of that, and I think like we talked a lot earlier about like how
Mhm.
substances are kind of shortcuts to pleasure and hedonism. I think nostalgia can be a shortcut to hedonism as well too, right? Because it's just like you said, that whole tension between something that's everyday and something that's special to somebody. That beach means something different to you than it does for somebody else, right? And for you, it's a
Yeah.
shortcut to it's a placeholder for all the awesome times you've had on the beach, right? And just including that there.
And
I,
go
I
ahead.
really remember Gabrielle Hamilton's book, Blood,
Yeah,
Bones,
yeah.
and Butter, right?
The
There's a
lamb.
passage. There's a passage in there where she talks about it's the central piece of the whole book, right?
Right.
Where she talks about her father roasting a lamb at the
Yeah, yeah.
and I know that spot. Like that's you could throw a rock from Lars's property in New Hope and hit that spot, and then Lars went on to was the grill master at Jim Hamilton's restaurant there. So there's other connections, which maybe anyway, but it's a nostalgia piece, and it just like I felt like I'd been there when I read that, and it's like the
Yeah.
same way that the way you just described everything you described, Charles, like yeah, it just
I felt,
it hits a button.
yeah, that story I felt like was a heartstring inroad to a very difficult person because there's a lot of challenging. The same thing with Bourdain's stuff, right? You come to appreciate a different way of doing things through this common experience, and it's quite, yeah. That passage really hit me too. As soon as you started saying it, I knew
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, guys, there's a last question that I like to ask in a lot of circumstances, but definitely for this show. Before we kind of sign off here, and Michael, I'll start with you. When you think about the future of hedonism, if you had in food, if you had a crystal ball about the next 10 years, what would you ask it?
For me to execute on hedonism or to enjoy my hedonism, give me a little bit more like as a creator, do you want me to kind of reflect on that?
Yeah, as a creator.
I would say like hedonism over the next 10 years is going to be consistently getting more and more immersive, and more interactive and more theatrical. That will be combined with this idea of pre-gamification, and the gamification will look more like education, knowledge transfer, preparation, and training for how to enjoy unique physical locations that will be designed to allow people to have maximum amounts of pleasure. That pleasure will come through either the ability to taste rare ingredients all in the same place, have access to rare chefs and food in the same place, preparations, but more likely than anything is to escape reality and go into another version of reality that has characters and has its own traditions and rituals, but also echoes to what Ben and Charles were just talking about a second ago, which is the human things that we all gather around here. But it'll be Bluey based, or it'll be like the fucking Detroit Lions based, or whatever the fuck it is. And that kind of immersive experience design where it fully immerses you inside that ecosystem and brings you into a place with excellent food and execution for you that ties to that story, I think is going to be a lot of what it is. And I would ask that crystal ball, how much do we need to do with that stuff? How much do we need to create customizable spaces? How many new spaces do we have to make? What kind of rituals do we keep from the past? And what new stuff do we focus on? Because there's a whole bunch of new experiences that we should be playing with, and ways to gather people that are going to be considered wasteful and outrageous. But most ways of gathering people are wasteful and outrageous, but we still have to do them, right? So like we just have to pick a couple of them and see which one of them stick. And I would love to know in my crystal ball, is climate change going to destroy our ability to have access to some of these ingredients? Which one should we be focusing on creating more delicious rituals around right now? How can we be celebrating and reducing the usage of other ingredients so that stuff can stick around longer? Any of that stuff from a ritual design perspective, I would love to kind of like look at it so that you could really make polenta super hedonistic at the same time giving people a maximized dopamine release and full sensory perception, but know that it's easy to like grow on a plot of land that's near the fucking hotel and stuff.
I love your tie into the kind of responsible hedonism kind of angle. Ben, how about you? What are
Um,
you asking your crystal ball?
I'm asking my crystal ball about. I mean, everything Michael just said is in line with, and we've talked about this outside of this current conversation, the idea of hedonistic sustainability, right? And I think, and I'm surprised, regenerative design hasn't come up in this conversation yet, but that's really, I think everything Michael just described is part and parcel to regenerative design. Because it's about organisms being able to engage with their environment, and so I would ask my crystal ball, like, is regenerative design going to bring us to a place where um, our hedonistic desires end up creating more abundance and literally healing the planet through regenerative systems? So that's about resilient ecologies, and I mean ecology in the broadest sense, right? It's agricultural, it's cultural, it's ocean systems, it's everything. And I think that's the direction we're going. Like this um, um, increased connectivity and increased options. Is humans go through this process, it's challenging. We're always taking a couple steps up and steps back, and suffering as a result of our innovations. But I think ultimately that's what it's doing. We're returning to a closeness to our environment. And I think that these trends that we're all talking about are that, and that is the concept of, hedonistic sustainability. I think that is a term from, like I was saying yesterday, I heard 10 or 15 years ago from Bjarke Engels in his talk. But the new word for the same thing is regenerative systems. So I would want the crystal ball to tell me if that's going to play itself out or not. I think it is, personally.
Partying for a purpose. Yes, that's a laudable goal to kind of go towards too.
Yeah.
Charlie, how about you?
Yeah, we're back to the oscillation to a goal, right? I feel like what Ben and Mike both touched on is we're at an inflection point where it could go, toward regenerative systems, but there's also the danger of going the other way. I often think I could write a book about the clam bakes on the beach and lobsters in general. I've watched lobsters disappear from the Long Island Sound from mosquito sprays and climate change. As the ocean warms, they're moving further and further north. It's been great for the people in northern Maine and Nova Scotia. There's more lobster abundance. And luckily, by some beautiful confluence, those places got management right. And so they were ready for this moment of all the supply is there, and they've got great management. Now, as it changes and they need to move further north, they may lose good bottom substrate and depths and all that stuff, and maybe lobsters go extinct. But I've often thought I want this book idea of lobster rolls on the edge of the apocalypse. It could go either way. We could lose lobsters entirely, or we could have them forever in perpetuity if we get it right. And it's this perfect high to low balance too. These, prison riots over lobsters being the main food, to lobsters being unaffordable because it's the food of the wealthy. And now we're at some in between where they're more affordable than they've ever been. And but less geographically available. So I would hope for the same thing. I would hope that our connectivity and our ability to travel both physically, our increased ability to travel both physically and virtually, will allow us to become more sensitive and respectful of other traditions, but also to grow back into our own traditions by realizing that these things that we think of exotic and special also mean that our experience is exotic and special to every, the 99% of other people that are on us. So I hope it brings a great awareness, and a humanity back into all of this, a great awareness in humanity.
So I want to thank you guys for joining me on this kind of conversation. We covered so much, from kind of the merits of chicken tenders to the future of mushrooms and marijuana and alcohol and things like that. Community, I really like the ideas that, like, it's not just, I think hedonism does kind of quickly gravitate towards this kind of idea of like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but it also can be kind of community. It can kind of be balance. It can kind of be all these different things. So it was super fun kind of tackling this conversation that I frankly I don't think gets talked enough in the kind of future of blank conversation. And it's just, we all celebrate, we all seek pleasure. How can we kind of ignore that? And so thanks for your time, guys. And great to have you here. And we look forward to tomorrow.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Thanks for
Be well,
having us.
Michael.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
Good night.
This episode of the Tomorrow Today Show is a production of the Spoon Podcast Network. Editing and production by Carlos Rodella. Writing, hosting, and music by me, Mike Lee. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes coming in Season 1.